Okay, so we're here at the 2024 Bill Gichner Hammer-In.
For anyone who isn't familiar with Bill Gichner, he was one of the blacksmiths who helped bridge the gap between the decline of blacksmithing in the mid-20th century and the resurgence as a craft that we see today. He started this event many years ago in his home shop in Ocean View, Delaware. He passed away in 2004, age of 91, and Mid-Atlantic Smiths has been carrying on this event in Bill's memory. So I need to give a disclaimer here. We had some issues with our equipment during filming, including dead battery and microphone issues. So I missed some parts here and there, and the sound is not great. But Pat was a wealth of knowledge, so it's well worth watching.
All right. Good. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and demonstrate for your group. I'm really, really excited. I gotta apologize up front. I have a head cold. I managed to get that right after the holidays. Stayed up way too late visiting with family and traveling and all that. So the cough drops and issues, but I'm still good. I think we'll do a good job. I've got some metal in the fire already. I'm gonna let that warm up. I thought maybe I would do just a little bit of a brief introduction. I gave one last night, but so maybe some folks here that weren't here last night. So my name is Patrick Nowak. I live in Wisconsin. I have a degree in metallurgical engineering. That's what I do in my professional life as a metallurgical engineer. And I'm also a blacksmith. I forge a lot of brokerway, which is something that we'll do a little later this morning, I think. I started blacksmithing when I was in college. I got into metallurgy because I started knife making when I was in junior high school and got introduced to the different alloys that are used for knives and how they're heat treated and how we can change their properties. And I thought that was really, really interesting, and that's what led me to the career that I have now. For the last 20 years, I've been working at a company called Scott Forge, and I did a presentation on them last night. They make large, very large forgings for big, heavy industrial applications. There's lots of heat treatment, lots of big, heavy deformation going on. So the techniques that we use are not really any different than what you might see. Not so much at the anvil, although there's definitely some overlap there. But if you were ever to see somebody who, like Clifton Ralph or some of the other individuals who had come to the artist blacksmith world from the world of industrial forging, they would have tools and techniques for including metal that were not maybe things that you would encounter in the typical sort of blacksmith environment. So we'll see. I'll show some of that type of work. The tools, I brought a whole bunch of different tools. Of course, lots of tongs, some half-round tools, lots of stop blocks for controlling size. The one thing that might be a little different, that people may not have as much experience with, that I'm going to do and use quite a bit, are these tools here. These are these triangle tools. So some people call these butchers, some people call them side sets, some people call them pullers, some people call them check tools. It just depends on who you ask as to what the name is. But their purpose is to create a sharp transition from one dimension to another dimension. And so I've got a few different projects where we're going to use those and show you how they work. And talk about why we would use those as opposed to doing forging without that tool. These, with the handles on them, are intended to be used under a power hammer or a press. I've got one here that's designed to go in a honeycomb. I'm going to pass this around. This is for my anvil at home. So this will be one of the first projects that we make. We'll make one of those for this anvil here. I also brought a couple of these tools that have handles for using at the anvil. Here's one that is really an interesting one. This one has some stops that are built right into the tool. So that when you set this on a workpiece and strike it, it'll bottom out against the anvil and you'll be left with a specific dimension. I don't know what this was created for. It was something that I got. Actually, I have a really fun story about that tool. I have another one. This one does the same thing. It doesn't have a stop built in. So those tools, especially the one with the stops built in, a job, and I needed to move from where I was living in Columbus. My wife and I were already married. We were expecting our first child, so we needed a house in the area where I was going to be working, which was about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of Columbus, Ohio. I grew up in Ohio, went to school at Ohio State. So I had been driving from Columbus up to Canton, which was about 130 miles every day to get to work. So that wasn't going to be a good thing long term. So we went looking for a house, and at that time I already had a small power header blacksmith shop. So that was important to us, was being able to find a place that we could have a shop. So we were, had that in our search criteria for homes. We were working with a realtor, and we found a few that we wanted to see, so we stopped at one on a Saturday morning, seeing what we found a promising spot. And we were concerned about having a blacksmith shop and neighbors and bothering the neighbors. So, as it happened, there was a gentleman next door who was out in his garden, an older man, and my wife walked over to talk to him about, would he be bothered by having a blacksmith in the neighborhood? And I stayed with the realtor. She came back and said, you need to go talk to the guy in the garden. He's got a bunch of blacksmithing tools. So I walked over, and it turned out he had been, I don't think he had been a blacksmith, but he had worked in one of the local steel mills. And when they were getting rid of their blacksmith shops in the steel mill, they took all the tools from the shop and threw them on the floor and said, guys, take whatever you want, we'll move out down the rest. So he had a 200-pound anvil and a whole bunch of hand tools and a whole bunch of tongs. And I ended up coming back later today and buying all of this from him. I wasn't even in my own vehicle, we were with the realtor, so I couldn't fill up the realtor's car with these tools. So it was just completely unexpected, but probably my favorite story of getting a bunch of tools in an unexpected way. No, we didn't buy that house. We did end up moving to the area. We ended up with a house. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Ohio at all. So Kent is just south of Akron, and we ended up purchasing a home in a little tiny town south and west of Kent, in a really tiny town called Beach City, which has no beaches at all, but was named apparently many years ago when they brought a railroad through that area. Apparently somebody associated with the railroad had the last name of Beach, and so the town said, we'll name our town after that guy, hopefully he'll bring the railroad through our town. That didn't happen, so the town has always been this tiny little, 600-person community, maybe a little bit more than that, but not much. There's no beaches there. It was a nice place to live. We only were there for a couple of years before we moved out to Wisconsin, so I could take the job and got fortunate. One thing I wanted to mention, I have note cards up here. So I'm hoping that you guys will have lots of questions, and I want to answer as many of the questions as I can. I hope you have lots of metallurgy questions, but we might not fit an answer a metallurgy question in the middle of whatever I'm working on at the time. So what I want you to do is, if you have a question that doesn't seem like it fits what we're talking about, write it down so you don't forget it, and then we'll come back to it. We can do that after dinner or whatever. But I know that it's easy to have a question and then forget it, as we move forward. So I'll leave these, I don't know, at the end of the rows, I guess. You can pass them out, and feel free to just scribble any questions down that you have there. Okay. One of the things that I do a lot, fairly often, is I have people over in the shop to forge, and often I will have young people in the shop who've never done anything with hand tools at all. And I did this one time with a group of young boys and their dads. My son and I were involved in a group called Trail Life for a long time. And so I had the guys from the Trail Life group come over. And we were going to make, does everybody know what a scroll roaster is? All know that? Okay, so. No, okay, all right, that's cool. That's fine. I should have brought one with me. But a scroll roaster is just a name for a campfire tool that is a fork on one end. And you make it whatever length you want, and you put a little hook on the other end. That's piece number one. Piece number two shaft with a loop and at 90 degrees to the shaft. So you push the little loop piece down in the ground next to the campfire, and then it'll hold you to the floor. And because you put a hook on the other end, you can reverse it, and you can hang a coffee pot or hot oven or something like that. So I'm sure there's other names for that tool, but when it was introduced to me, it was called squirrel roaster, so that's what I call it. So I had in mind that we would make some squirrel roasters. And so right away there's a lesson here that this is probably a project which is more complex than one should attempt with kids who are like 8 years old who've never done any of this before. Because it's a complex project, number one, and it's got long, skinny, hot things that have sharp ends. So I recognized that there were going to be some safety hazards with this project, and I really didn't want anybody to get hurt. We probably had, I don't know, 8 or 10 kids and their dads in the shop, and none of them had any prior forging experience, and most of them didn't have any prior handwork experience of any sort. But I wanted everybody to have a safe and fun day, and I thought it was going to be really important to help those kids understand some of the hazards of being in a blacksmith shop. And I was thinking about how do I do that in a way that's going to stick with those guys, because I can just tell them, like, we all know you tell kids something and it doesn't always really stick, and they don't follow your instructions, right? And in a shop with crammed with people, and you've got a lot of hazards, I didn't want to have that going on. So what I did was I took 2 pieces of steel and I put one in the fire, and I took one and set it up on the edge of the fire, just like I've done here. And I got a pork chop, which is what I brought with me this morning. I got it excited. I got it extra early in the shopping this morning for pork chops. So this is a demonstration that's really, really good if you have a dog at home, because the dog can get pork chop treats. So I took my pork chop, and I took this piece of steel out of the furnace like this, and I did this. And I said, that could be your hand, or your eye, or your face, if you're goofing off with your buddies around what you're doing. Like don't let that be you. And don't be the guy holding on to that like that's going to happen to your friend or your dad or yourself, right? Okay? So that's pork chop number 1, this piece of steel number 1. Quick bucket. Okay. So we need to find some place to put that. And seriously, if anybody has a dog at home and wants to take it for dog treatment, great. Actually, what I'll do, I'll use this backside of this one. So the other thing I did was I took this other piece of steel, which had been sitting on the edge of the forge like this, and I said, this one's not glowing. What happens? Like, we don't get the fun, aggressive flame, but we're still getting a nasty burn, right? And of course, as grown-ups who've been around forge work, we probably already know that. That's not a big surprise to any of us. But if you're a kid, if you haven't seen that before, that hopefully is making a good impression upon you about how to be safe, what can happen if you're not paying attention in the shop, right? And so that was my little safety demonstration. And this was for a group that was associated with the church and so forth. So I also had spiritual application to go with this little demonstration. And anybody have a spot where we can put this? Seriously, if anybody's got a dog they really love, wants pork chops, they can take that home. So my little spiritual application that goes with that is that we have, the Bible talks about sin being a problem. And in the Old Testament, we've got sin described as an action that we do or don't do, like lying and stealing and killing each other, and things like that. That's pretty obvious. That's a lot like having a piece of yellow hot steel, and we know that that's not what I'm supposed to do that. In the New Testament, Jesus talks about sin that has to do with our attitudes, how we think about one another, how we think about each other. Maybe not our actions, but are we envious? Are we prideful? Do we hate someone else? We may never take any physical action against that person. But Jesus talks about that as being sin as well. So we have these 2 examples of something that's really, really hot. It's pretty obvious we should avoid that. But the one that's into that, easy to pick that up if we're not paying attention to burn ourselves, right? It'd be easy to start having attitudes that are sinful attitudes, and we need to be guarding against that. So I talked about those two things, and then at the end of the day, when we were all done, I brought everybody back into the shop, and I said, so, I want to show you something else. And we could do it with this forge if we let it sit a little longer, but we're going to get going on the demonstration. But I took my forge and I turned it up as hot as I could get it, and I put a piece of steel in there, and I said, everybody come around, look in there after that steel is nice and hot. If we do that with a really, really hot forge, you really can't see the steel inside the forge. It's there, but you can't see it unless you wear shaded glasses. And I said, that's kind of like God being holy. He's perfect. He doesn't have any of that simple stuff. And that's a barrier to our being able to have a relationship with him. Because he's so intensely clean that we can't get in there, we can't get into his presence. And Jesus is the way that we overcome that obstacle, all that sin. So that was my little spiritual application for my pork chop demonstration. Now, I want to move on to forging some stuff. And the first thing we're going to do is forge this tool. So I passed one around at the beginning. This is a little one, the practice piece I made yesterday. We'll pass this one around. But I want to talk about, and you'll see throughout my demonstration today and tomorrow, how we pay attention to the starting material we have. And by that I mean the size and shape of what we have versus what it is we want to end up with. So I already measured out the hardy hole on this anvil is 1 3/8 square. And I wrote out just a little bit of how I would do a calculation to determine how much material do I need to make this little part. So we have, I'm going to be starting with some stock that's 1.5 inches by 2 inches. And I'll talk about specifically what material I've got here in a minute. The stem, the shank on this tool is 3 inches long and it's 1 3/8 square. And so I just calculated the volume. It gives me a little over 5 cubic inches. And then I have what I call the blade section of the tool. And in this particular case, it's 1 by 2 by 2.5. And I calculate that volume and I end up with a total volume, excuse me, a little over 10.5 inches. Okay? So, what I can do is go to my starting stock, and that's already in the furnace, and measure off a length of that starting material that has the volume of 10.5, 10 5/8, which for this particular piece of starting material that ends up being about 3.5 inches. So I made a mark already on that so I can see it when it comes out. We'll cut it with a hammer with a tool called a hack. Thank you, Eric. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, good. So we might want to think about why does it matter? Why would we bother with doing math like that? I've got a bar that's 18 or 20 inches long. I've got more than enough to make, whatever I want. Why bother going through the trouble of doing that math and figuring it out? The reason is because I want to be using my material in a responsible way. I could just randomly hack off a chunk, take it, but if I have access to the tool when I'm done, I can leave it in the tool and just change the dimensions of the tool, and it probably would work just fine. But I would rather have control over what's happening when I'm forging. And so that's a theme that you'll see when I talk about metallurgy and also when I talk about forging, is having control. When we do anything in the shop, whether we're at the hand hammer or power hammer press, or we're quenching something, we should be trying to exercise control over what's happening and not be just random in what's going on. If I hit something, I want to hit that material with the intent of having it do something, moving the metal somewhere to achieve some desired outcome. Not just randomly walk up and smack at it, right? I want to have control. Part of that process of having control is knowing how much metal to use for a project, using it judiciously. In some cases, materials can be expensive, so we don't want to waste them. In some cases, the material may not be that expensive, but there might be some downstream processing. And if I can minimize the amount of downstream processing, say machining or grinding, by forging closer to a final dimension, then I may be able to save overall time in the production of that project. And this is something that I'm being paid to do, that I can make more money per hour, right? So having control from a dimensional standpoint is important. It's also important because there may be some size and shape that you want to make. If you don't figure it out ahead of time on paper, you won't end up with what you want. So I have some examples here of what I mean by that. So these are, we can pass them around if you want. These are a little chunky, but these are two pieces of 4340 material. These were forged from some 2.5-inch round by about 10.5 inches long. And I was attempting to make rectangles. And you'll see I got pretty good rectangles. These would be starting blocks to make the Halligan project that we'll talk about later. But if you come and look at these, you'll see that there's some radiuses here in these corners, right? Now, for my Halligan project, that wouldn't make any difference at all. But if I was trying to make a really nice, let's say I wanted to make this into a power hammer die or a press die, that radius might not be a part of the design. So how do I forge that to keep that from happening, right? Do I need more material? Do I need material of a different starting size and shape so that as I forge it, I don't get that going on? Those are all things that we need to think about, and it's part of how we exercise control over the things that we're producing. When we get to having something already forged and maybe machined or ground, if that's what we're doing, or we want some heat treatment, now we're exercising control over properties, not just the size and shape, but the properties and performance characteristics. If we talk a lot about that, we'll probably save those conversations for a little later in the day or this evening after dinner. So I'm going to go ahead and start. We're going to section off, cut off a chunk of material that is 3.5 inches long. We'll do that with the hack tool I have up here. This is a common tool we use under a power hammer or a press. We use tools like this at work. So this is a tool, just a thin, flat blade. We use these at work, but they're big enough that you have to bring them up with forklift type equipment. Use that to hold it on one piece of the there's no faster way to cut through a piece of steel than this, especially if you've got a piece of steel that's the size of this table as a block. You take that tool, you sit up there, the press comes down, pushes it, you rotate it 180 degrees, push it through, you've got two pieces now. It's great if you don't need the precision of a saw cut dimension, right? If you needed to have something super precise, you can take it to a bandsaw or some other kind of saw and cut it with greater precision. But you don't need that level of precision. This is really, really good. So I marked this with a grinder. Before once that we got here. I figured out the volumes that I needed for my shank and my blade, but I did not figure out the length I needed just for the shank, and that's why I wanted to reheat that. So to do that, we know we need 5.6 cubic inches at 1.5 by 2. So 5.6. Actually, 5 times 2. All right, so the calculator says I need one. We'll take 2 inches, or estimate 2 inches of that starting cross section to use for the shank of this tool. And what I'm going to do so sometimes measuring things hot is kind of a challenge. So what I'm going to do is just make a mark on the dies, just a temporary mark, and it's 2 inches in from one edge. Different pencil, I'm going to do it. But that way I won't have to try to actually see that and do it hot. I could take a center punch and set it over on the anvil and just mark it, but I don't need to do that. I'll just give myself a mark there. And the other thing that I need to do, because we have a particular dimension of this hardy hole, is 1 3/8. So I will use an 1 3/8 stop block to ensure that I get the right size. One thing about stop blocks is that they, at least in my shop, they always get covered in scale and in grease and things, and it's hard to know exactly what size you have. You have to stop and measure every single one of them. But here we go. So what I just did was just use a piece of 5/16 round to create a little top and bottom half round groove. It'll be a reference for me to work to and create the transition from where the blade section to the shank section will go. One of the things you can do when you're doing a job like this, where you have a specific dimension you're trying to work to. So I grab the stop block when you see I didn't use it yet. I can judge by eye where I'm at in the project up to a certain point just by looking at the dimensions that I have. So I know that piece is 1.5 inches thick. So if I'm looking at 1.5 inches dimension, or if I rotate it 90 degrees, I can pretty quickly see, am I still bigger than 1.5 inches? And if I am, I don't need to put the stop block up there. So it allows me to keep both hands on the work longer than when I get close to the size I actually need. Then I'll pick up the stop block and begin using that. I tend to prefer to hold my work with both hands on the tongs when I'm using a power hammer, if I can, but there's certainly lots of things that I do where I have auxiliary tools and I need one hand for the tools. In some cases, it's really helpful to have a partner come out and hold a tool because you still want to have both hands on the work so you can really control what's going on. Well, that's, give that a little bit more. So for those that weren't here last night in my shop at home, I have 2 power hammers. They're both Bradley mechanical hammers. They are what are described as guided helm hammers. And the ones that I have, one is a 300-pound machine and the other is a 500-pound machine. So they're the 2 largest size hammers that Bradley made. And they're wonderful machines. One of the things that's really nice about a big hammer, besides having power to do big things, if that's what you're into, is that you have lots of die area, so that it's easy to put things on the dies and keep them there. Even if they want to bounce around a little bit, you have more real estate for things to bounce and not fall off the dies. And certainly things fall off my dies, all the time. If you get to where you're working something and you have a lot of weight on the back side of the die and you don't keep it level, it's going to want to pop up or pop down. It pops out the tongs and it falls on the back side of the machine and you have to go pick it up. But you have a lot more space. So my dies are about 4 inches wide and 10 or 12 inches long, depending on which machine I'm on. And that length of die gives you lots of space to put stop blocks that are clamped directly to the die, which I'll do that in another project where we'll just clamp blocks right on here. And so you can do that and still have lots of real estate between the blocks to control your work and do other functions. I should interject here about questions. I love questions, and I also really like teaching. I get a wonderful opportunity to often teach either at work to people who want to learn more about metallurgy or how we control things in the forge shop, or I get a chance to sometimes teach in college classes, which is particularly a lot of fun. And what I'll do when I start a class is I will encourage everyone to ask questions, and I will tell the class that if you don't ask questions, as a teacher, I am forced to make one of 3 assumptions. 1, you already know everything, and so you're not learning anything in my class. 2, you're sleeping in my class. Or 3, I am the best teacher you have ever had, and I'm explaining everything perfectly. And if I get no questions, which of those 3 assumptions am I going to make? Number 3, I'm the best teacher you've ever had. But I don't actually believe that about myself, so please ask me questions. Please ask questions. Yes? Right. Yeah, so the question is, with a mechanical, you do have limitations in terms of stroke, because you have to have enough clearance for that mechanism to be able to complete its cycle, otherwise the hammer just won't go. With an air hammer like this one, you can have a tiny little stroke. You might not get a lot of power, but at least you won't lock up your machine. So how do I manage that with my machines? Well, that's a real limitation that I sometimes run into. When I was forging these blocks, what I did was I have a large sound block, and I have very large ram. And so there's a lot of overhang between the die, outside the die, there's another several inches on either side that you could use for forging, and that's what I did there. Is I stood those pieces up there. The dies are 2.5 inches tall, I think, or 2 inches tall, so I stood them up, not on the die, but sitting on the saddle block, and just tapped on them and kept rotating them. And they were taller than is ideal for an upset. I can talk about what that is in a little bit. But it was effective in my case. Another thing I've done is I've taken the bottom die out, and my dovetails are pretty wide, so I can put pieces right into the dovetail and forge right into the dovetail. That's actually what I did. So some of you might have seen this yesterday, but there's a big Damascus billet up here. And I've got another piece that we're going to use to make one of the projects here in a few minutes. This is another show and tell piece here. We should pass this around. What I did in that case, so that billet was 2 inches wide, 5 inches tall, and 10 inches long, and I was concerned about not having enough stroke, so I just took the lower die out and gave it another 2 inches. Now on a Bradley, I can do things like go and adjust the length. There's a way that you increase the die spacing up to a certain amount, but that requires a very large pipe wrench and extra time. So I often don't do that. I'll try to do one of these other things first. But I can do that. You can adjust the stroke, and that'll change the positioning between the dies and stuff. So Bradleys have a lot of adjustability in them, which you can do. On big machines, it's a little bit time consuming to do that, so I tend to try to find alternate solutions for that. But at some point, you're going to reach a spot where you're just not going to be able to keep going. The tool staff or the workpiece is just going to be too tall. Oh, in the same heat? In the same heat, I don't run into trouble mostly on the Bradley. So I do most of my work on a 300-pound machine because I have it tuned better, and I can forge on that machine from 5 inch down to nothing and not have to make any changes. There's enough gear in that system, so I don't normally run into that problem. No. Oh, I was going to say, and I didn't. So that was made from a piece of forklift fork that I got. It was one that had been damaged at work, so I was able to take it home. That particular fork I had checked so that I could understand the composition. That one was a .30 carbon, about 0.3 carbon, about 1.5 manganese, and just a little bit of chrome. So it doesn't really fall into one of the standard grade labels that we're all used to seeing, like a 1030 or something like that. It's more alloy content than a 1030, but definitely not enough to be like a 4130 or a 8230 or something like that. So it's just basically a higher manganese version with a little bit of extra chrome. So I would describe it as a modified 1030 material. For this application, where this isn't really a tool that needs to have a sharp cutting edge, it's not going to get real hot in service. This is just a fine grade for this application. We can heat treat it. We could probably use it without heat treating it. It probably be just fine. We might heat treat this one. We'll see. When it comes to selecting tool materials, we should probably spend a bunch of time talking about that because there are a lot of options. I'm sure this is hot. Let me do a little forging on this, and then we'll come back to that.
Quite often when you do something like this, the tool will tend to stick in the hole a little bit. So I left it in there to let it cool, and it comes right out. So as I was forging this, the shank got just a little bit diamond shaped, and so you might have been, I don't know if you can see, but what I did is I was checking against the hole in the anvil, and I could see I had some corners that were a little bit out of square, so I intentionally forged a little flat on that corner there, and also right here, to give me clearance to get into the hurdy hole. That rag that we got on the bottom from the hot cut is something that we can take off later, so I didn't really want to worry about it. If you get your tools lined up just right, you can shear that rag and it comes out clean and neat and you don't have anything to worry about here. So, okay, so the next step on this is going to be to draw out the blade section. I'm going to probably switch tongs. And while that's reheating, I want to talk a bit about how we're going to do that. And another aspect of controlling how metal moves. So, when I pass these around, you've got the one that I did at home, and I've, of course, finished this off a little bit. So this one I did yesterday with no finishing. But what I'm interested in having you see, and maybe I should draw this a little bit larger, is that we want a bevel on one side for the working geometry of this tool. We can forge that in most of the way by how we set up the drawing out part of this. So if I was to just draw this out on the flat dies, like I did the shank, right, like so, I would end up with the metal kind of bulging in the center. And that would be fine, and I could go back and I could grind that to the geometry that I want. But if I don't need that feature to be centered in this shank, which we know for this tool, I can do my forging preferentially on one side and force one side to stretch, which gives me this bevel. And then I have a lot less grinding that I have to do to get to the final geometry that I'm looking for. So that's what we'll do. We'll do that with just a half round tool like this one here. Just a half round. To make a tool like this, a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can take a round bar, cut it in half, weld a handle on it. You could take and make a half round swage and forge this profile in a swage. And that's what I did with this one, that I made the handle all out of one piece, but there's no particular reason that you need to do it that way. You'll see most of my tools lately are made with welded handles like these, just because it's so much faster. The only time where you might not do that is if you chose to make a tool from steel that you don't want to weld on. So like that hack tool, which I said over here. Yeah. So this particular tool is made from H13. And I know you can weld H13, but I don't need to weld H13, so I went ahead and forced it all out of one piece. And that would be like the way I prefer to do it if I was using that material. If I was using a lower alloy steel, like it could be 160 or 4340 or something like that,
Those are easier to weld successfully, and so I can probably handle on that. I mentioned tool material. What should we use for the tools in our shops? Of course, we've got lots of different tools in our shops that even perform different functions, and so we might want to use different materials for those. One of the things that I see a lot in the blacksmithing community is a desire to use the materials that are going to give best performance based on what we have available to us today through modern steel making, which is really neat. Like, it's super cool that we have grades like H13 and B2 and all these other amazing materials. We need to keep in mind that we don't have to have those materials to do good forge work. Power hammers have been around longer than tool steels, in the sense of the way I use the term tool steels, which are things other than iron and carbon in the steel. The modern classification of tool steels is mostly materials that didn't exist before about 1865. Power hammers have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. We didn't have those kinds of materials. Handles, all of our other hand tools, have been around for thousands of years. We didn't have those materials. So don't feel obligated to use one of those more modern materials in your own shop. However, if you want to, go for it. Like, there's some really great materials out there. Reasons why we might want to use a new steel, newer steel. H13 in particular is a really common, this is what's referred to as a hot work tool steel. I like this for this application because I can make this tool thin, which means it doesn't require much force to drive through the work, and it will it can get hotter without deforming. Now, it'll still deform. Like, if I drive this through a big block of metal and I leave it in there and it gets red hot, H13 will still bend and deform. But it's going to take more heat for that to happen than if I did the same thing with a piece of 5160 or 4140. So the modern steel gives me, basically, it gives me the opportunity to be more abusive to my tools. And in certain classes of work, that's likely to happen more often than in others. So it makes sense to choose a steel like that. I also like H13 for anvil cutting tools because, again, I like to have a big cross-section tool, and so I find that it allows me to get a tool that performs better because I can make it thin, as opposed to having a steel that doesn't have the high temperature working properties that H13 has. But again, certainly not any kind of obligation to do that. Okay, I need to take another heat on this, and then we'll come back to our discussion of materials. Okay, so that tool is as done as it needs to be from a forging perspective. A little bit of grinding, we could heat treat it, but we wouldn't have to, and that's ready to go into service. I'm going to set this on the back so we can cool down. Sure? So we were able to do that by using the half-round tool and to localize the deformation on one side and stretch this out. I have another piece up here that actually is one for Pete Renzetti that we did yesterday. This is not a tool, this is a project he's got going on, but we used the exact same, this is just a little bit more, but I think we can pass it around. We use the exact same principles to create a profile that's wider on one side than it is on the other. This is just a piece of iron for a special project that he's got going on. But we started off with a piece of rectangular stock with square corners, and we did exactly what I just did. We used a half-round tool on the top to spread this, and then he needed this side narrowed, so you'll see where we've got some hammer marks so we can squeeze this down. It's a little bit warm, but it shouldn't be too hot to hold. So, talk about tool materials, and then we're going to come back and talk about controlling how that moves. I'm going to put this piece in the fire. This is another big piece of pattern welded material, and we're going to make a block that looks like this for this. And this is going to give us an opportunity to show how we use side set tools. And while that's warming up, we'll talk about tool materials. So tool materials, I said earlier, I like H13 for things where I'm going to be cutting stock hot. And it works really well for that. It's certainly not the only thing that's available. Other people like S7. There's other alloy tool steels that are available. There's a whole series of hot work tool steels that can be used for those kinds of applications. For tools like the half round that I was just using, which is here. A lot of times these kinds of tools can be made from just whatever you have on hand. So a piece of 1018, whatever piece of scrap you have that's the right size, that's usually what I end up grabbing from a tool like that. If you make that from something that has a little bit more carbon and a little bit of alloy content more than a simple 1018 material, they'll probably last a little bit longer. But a tool like this one doesn't have any sharp edges, it has no corners. It's really just basically it's a rolling pin, right? So this tool would wear out maybe if you used it against material that was really cold or was a piece of steel that had pretty high strength even when it's hot, to where the workpiece material is similar in hardness to the tool material. That doesn't happen a lot in our own shops unless you do a lot of, say, forging of H13. Like if I was going to forge a bunch of tools out of H13,